Let me ask you about Jordan Peterson. You had a great conversation with him.
Yeah.
He has a complicated view of faith, or faith, period. He has said that he believes in Jesus, the person and the myth, and some of the...
He reminds me of the Church Fathers, because the Church Fathers would have looked at they call it the moral sense of the Scripture. Peterson probably called it the psychological meaning.
But I think that the Catholicism, that's as sane as people can get.
But I think he's doing a lot of that. For Kant, it's not so much the historical Jesus, this figure from long ago. It's Jesus as an archetype, the image of the person perfectly pleasing to God. And so Jesus inhabits our kind of moral imagination as a heuristic. But the historical person of Jesus for Kant is like, well, let's not fuss about that so much.
Here's a video about Jordan Peterson's attempts to convince people that he believes in God.
People often ask me, do you believe in God? Which I don't like that question. I don't like that question. I don't like that question. Yeah, I don't like the question.
I get the distinct impression that Peterson doesn't like that question because he, at some level, understands that the God referred to by theologians and apologists is nonsensical.
People have asked me whether or not I believe in God, and I've answered in various ways. No, going where a bunch of other people are to reaffirm your commitment that's got some power in it, and I think it's dangerous. I mean, look, there's a sanctimonious authority that goes along with that that's the wrong tone. It's more like,
it wouldn't be a Jordan Peterson video without the waterworks.
I'm not an atheist anymore because I don't look at the world that way anymore. I'm not a materialist anymore. I don't think the world's made out of matter. I think it's made out of what matters. It's made out of meaning.
What's meaning made out of?
The archetype of Jesus. And even language of like, live as though God exists. That's the als ob of Kant, the kind of as if.
Who would have the audacity to claim that they believed in God?
Take another drink, folks.
Firstly, I want to know, you had a conversation with Jordan Peterson, and he's writing a book at the moment for talking about religion. The God Delusion, which was the atheist book. Do you think it still survives as a sufficient treatment of God and religion?
I probably might add a chapter on the idea of what Dan Dennett calls belief in belief.
I get the feeling that sometimes, a la Dan Dennett...
Could you unpack this phrase you use, belief in belief? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I guess it's my favorite chapter in the book is about belief in belief. People who actually believe in God also believe in belief in God. That is, they think it's a good thing. They're all for it. They're proud of the fact that they believe in God. They think it's good. Once in a while, you'll encounter somebody who actually deeply, bitterly regrets the fact that they can't shake their belief in God. They wish they could, but it's a weakness. That's a rare individual. So all those people believe in belief in God, and then the people who don't believe in God, many of them, just believe in belief in God. And the more I thought about it, and the more I explored this, I discovered how true that is. They don't need religion, but they are the self-appointed defenders of religion, and they believe in belief in God, and they view me as mounting an attack on this, and in a way I am.
What Peterson is doing is not so much believing in a God, but he's believing in belief. He's valuing the idea that if we believe these things, there's benefits. When we talked about whether or not there was a God, one of the questions that I thought of ahead of time to ask, and I did ask, is what are you afraid that we'll lose if people stop believing in a God? If you lose that belief, what you also lose, according to him, is art.
He does, with some regularity, say something ridiculous enough with the same confidence he says all of the good things that I perceive a real problem with what he's doing.
Can you give me an example of one of those just for...
Well, did you see his event with Matt Dillahunty? Did you see that?
I didn't see it, but I know a lot of people have been talking about it.
That's worth watching.
Belief is the state of being convinced that a proposition is true or likely true. It's everything that I try to do, I tend to view in the form of propositional reasoning. So when we talk about the narrative...
Yeah, that's a problem, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, well, you can't reduce the world to a set of propositions.
Why not?
Oh. Look.
Show me something that is
No
true
problem.
in the world that I could not put in a proposition.
Oh, that's easy. You sure you want to go there?
I'm not afraid of anything.
Okay. Okay.
If I'm wrong, I want to know I'm wrong. Demonstrate to me any benefit.
Oh, you'd lose art and poetry and drama and narrative and story.
Are there no godless artists and poets?
Well, there are artists and poets who think they're godless.
Are you telling me there's no atheist artists, that there's no godless heathen rock musicians? Hell, I can write a poem for you right now.
While we were finishing up on stage, he said he'd be happy to have another conversation with me. And then the second the debate was over, he bolted off the stage, went and locked himself in his dressing room.
But when you hold Christ up as a particular figure, the only information that I have about Jesus comes from the Bible. There's not a secular humanist organization or country on the planet that has ever produced as an intentional good thing rapists and murderers. So,
well, that's highly debatable. I don't know. I think the Soviets were pretty secular humanists.
Then,
I know
with all due apologies, you do not know the first thing about what secular humanism is, because what happened in Russia and communist countries was an institution of a religious-like structure centered around an individual and forced atheism, none of which is consistent with humanism. None of it. You can say that it was an atheist thing that went awry, but you can't call it secular humanism. It's just not there. There's no humanism in what was done there.
And what I was told is that his manager, publicist, whoever, basically said, you should never do another event with that guy. And so I haven't heard anything from Jordan Peterson since that night.
I don't think that did any favors for him.
No.
But especially when he said, you can't quit smoking without a mystical experience.
Just like people report other experiences as if they were religious or ghosts or whatever, we have no way of confirming that something mystical or supernatural actually happened. What this is about the language.
Stops people from smoking.
Well, you can stop smoking without any sort of supernatural intervention.
No, not really.
You can't stop smoking without supernatural?
There aren't really any reliable chemical means for inducing smoking cessation.
Is that supernatural?
No, you don't need a supernatural effect, but it doesn't work very well. But if you give people magic mushrooms, psilocybin, and they have a mystical experience, it's kind of like evidence.
It's evidence that you can take mushrooms and increase your chance of quitting smoking. But
no, it's not.
Okay, if you take mushrooms and you have an experience that you describe as mystical, that doesn't tell me whether or not there was something to this notion that they had an experience that was supernatural in any sense.
Seriously, Kirk, the whole of creation testifies to the genius of God's creative hand. It absolutely does. You think of the human eye.
Jordan Peterson reveals something that maybe you wouldn't guess about him, or maybe you would. I don't know.
Vision can expand to the point where they can see down into the micro level. They can apprehend the micro level consciously.
You think that our consciousness can extend down to the micro level, to the level of...
I do.
The micro level of DNA. Okay.
I have taken extremely high doses of psilocybin. 4 doses is enough basically to knock you out of your body. I wouldn't recommend it casually. I took 7 grams 3 times. And I had this shamanic.
You were really high. But Jordan Peterson's like, yeah, I could.
Jordan Peterson, more about his mushroom trip that he thinks was real.
But you've just said that you think that your consciousness can see into your cells and see the structure of DNA. That has got to be utter nonsense. I'm sorry.
Well,
dude, if you can't trip without being like, everything I saw was real in a very literal way, then you don't have no business taking none of that shit, okay?
He just took a big fat shit and then wiped his ass with Jordan Peterson's diploma.
The pseudo-politeness of it makes it better. Listen, I believe you did have a profound and wonderful experience. I've never done that myself, but I must say, what you're saying is nonsense, Jordan.
It's got to be utter nonsense.
Perfectly reasonable, willing to admit forthrightly that that is a highly speculative idea.
That's one way of saying total bullshit. Like, we know the range of the eye's perception. I never seen Richard Dawkins dom somebody this hard, dude.
Can you imagine if Hitchens was still alive, dude?
Oh my God. That would be remove the polite veneer, up the snark, and up the wit about 125%.
Jordan Peterson's career would not survive a single encounter
No.
with Christopher Hitchens.
No.
He would be over.
It is speculative, but it's also got to be false.
Why?
Can you hear the exasperated pause? He's like, is he really going to make me explain to him why his eyeball can't see DNA?
No.
Yeah.
And fair, look, in all probability, you're right.
Oh my God. This is the weaseliest shit.
I mean, we both wise enough to use Occam's razor. That was the most speculative idea that I'd ever uttered to my students.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I mean, I understand that.
It's strange to be in a position to defend it.
I
I'm telling you
understand
why I made that, but there was more to it than that, because in this vision,
Man, this is
Digging the hole deeper and deeper as you go. Just shut up.
This is the bullshitter that just got caught in a lie, digging their hole deeper because everybody is just like, you're full of shit.
You've been caught with your pants down. Everyone knows you're a fucking liar.
He's trying desperately to get Richard Dawkins to do him the solid of just reaching some kind of ambiguous agree to disagree moment.
I could feel my consciousness go down these levels of analysis. And I could see things that appeared to me in my field of imagination. And I looked at them and I thought, that looks a lot like DNA.
But you're an educated man who already knows about DNA.
He shows two snakes coiling around each other and says, well, they must have had some primeval knowledge of DNA. Perhaps they looked into their own cells in some sense and saw the DNA. The double helix is a Jungian archetype. I mean, that is sheer bullshit, and I told him so.
Jordan, you're educated. You know that you can't see DNA.
Our allegation is that he's a bullshit artist and a grifter. And here's Richard Dawkins, one of the smartest people, at least in the conversation.
He's definitely the smartest one in the conversation.
You're not going to wriggle your way out of the confident statement that you made just a minute ago that you believe that under certain circumstances, the human eye can see all the way down to the micro level. You admitted to this dude who's all about the scientific method and the march of science to drive progress. And you told him that you told a bunch of students this stupid fucking lie.
You could have a visionary experience and think you see your DNA in your own cells. That, of course, is highly plausible. What is not
because I already know about it.
Yes. What is not plausible is that somebody who does not know about it,
who
working long before Watson and Crick discovered the structure of DNA,
could possibly apprehend
that. That just isn't
fair
wrong.
enough. I guess I would only say in defense of that idea is that...
See, he's not going to let it go. He can't be wrong. Why are you defending the idea that you can see your DNA?
You pretty much got the olive branch there, kind of.
Irrational.
I think he's not satisfied with the level to which it's salvaged.
Jordan Peterson, of course, is not satisfied, but Jordan Peterson's a huckster.
It is the case that consciousness can travel up and down levels of analysis in a real sense. And it isn't absolutely inconceivable that that's an expandable capacity under some circumstances.
When he talks about religion, I think it's bullshit. It doesn't make any sense at all. I think he's impressing people by using language they don't understand, rather like Deepak Chopra, where people think, oh, it must be terribly profound because I can't understand it, which is not something I can respect.
I think before I even went to bed that night, I emailed Sam Harris.
Right. But I mean, he'll confidently say things like, atheists aren't really atheists. I mean, like there's a real atheist is a psychopath who murders people. I mean, so those people have existed, but someone like Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins, or he said this directly to Matt Dillahunty in this case.
Ozymandias Ramses, many of you know, a philosopher, he was there at that event and asked one of the best questions during the Q&A, and it really led to some clarity. He's exceptionally good at being able to ask the right question that directs a conversation towards the linchpin that you need to pull.
My question is for you, Dr. Peterson. You implied that Matt and others are not genuinely atheists. I'm curious why you think that. What, in your view, would a genuine atheist be like?
He plots the perfect murder. He undertakes the murder, and he gets away with it. And he basically says, look, well, there's no God. There's no metaphysical reason that's stopping me from committing this act. Perhaps I'm nothing but a moral coward for failing to undertake it. So he does. But what he finds out is that he broke an inviolable moral rule. I'm not projecting this onto them. They've stepped outside the ancient moral code unwittingly, conducted themselves in a manner they cannot reconcile themselves to, and they are permanently broken. I think that's an accurate psychological summation.
Thank you. I'm curious if Matt has any thoughts on the matter.
You think?
I have plenty.
So you're not really an atheist because. Now, in Dr. Peterson's case, you're not really an atheist because, in my mind, an atheist is someone who would be a murderer. And so I'm just, rather than saddle you with that, you just think you're an atheist, but really you're not. An atheist is somebody who doesn't believe there's a God. I am not convinced there's a God. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm convinced there are no gods. This is, as I've talked about previously, independent of whether or not I can be a moral being or do good things, is independent from whether or not there's awe and wonder or purpose and meaning in my life. There were atheist fans who wrote me that were like, oh man, I can't wait till you do this conversation with Jordan. And I was like, cool. And so the good news for them is that while he thinks atheists would be murderers, he doesn't actually think you're an atheist. And that is his way of getting around acknowledging things that conflict with his worldview. I don't get to decide who is or isn't a true Christian. I didn't even get to decide that when I was a believer. I definitely don't get to do it now. So if somebody tells me they're a Christian, I'm going to have to accept that. I have a model in my head of what that means. I have a model in my head of what it means to be a Muslim, but I'm willing for them to explain to me what their model is. I know people who identify as Christian atheists. They really love the stuff that Jesus said, but they don't actually believe there's God. You know, Thomas Jefferson famously cut out the Jefferson Bible and removed every reference to the supernatural and miracles and things like that because he really admired the teachings of it. And sure, it's strange to me that I'm not sitting here with somebody like Ray Comfort when I'm told you're not really an atheist because you're too good to be an atheist. And this is what atheists hear all the time. They've been sidelined because of religious privilege around the world for years. And then atheists come out to their family members or friends or people they've known for years, and they're like, you're an atheist? How can that be? You're such a good person. I've known you all this time. It's because the mindset of what people have about what an atheist is has been poisoned by religious proclamations. We have been denigrated from the pulpit, and it has seeped into every aspect of culture, right up to the height of intellectual pursuits. And it's time for that to end.
They only think they're atheists, not really atheists. They have a God and that's functioning in their life, and they're just not acknowledging it, right? And again, it comes back to this historical claim that we all grew up in the West. We all got our ethics and our theology without ever naming it. We got it in the water, right? And so any sense you have of what is good and worth doing, any sense you have of value, the reason why it would be bad to murder somebody, the reason why you don't have to think that through from first principles every day, and you can just navigate this social space with other people in the West, it's because you are dependent on these stories, this tradition, right? And this God. I don't know what the Steelman interpretation of what he's actually doing is here, but
that brings us to what I like to call the Peterson Dilemma. It's actually the most charitable way we can possibly interpret J. Pete's wider pattern of behavior. The Peterson Dilemma has 4 possible solutions. A. Peterson's secretly a postmodernist. B. He fundamentally doesn't understand the philosophy he's criticizing. C. He does see the hypocrisy here but chooses to ignore it. Or D. Some combination of the above. And ultimately, I'll leave you to decide what the answer is here. My YouTube channel is many things, and one of those things has always been keeping an eye on old Jordan and taking note of every time he says or does something particularly, well, dumb.
You know that there are central doctrines to Christianity, like the crucifixion, the ascension, the resurrection, and all the above, right? These are doctrines. All types of Christians will agree with it. Catholics will agree with it, Eastern Orthodox and Protestants. All of them will say you must believe in these doctrines as happening. You cannot believe in them as symbol. You cannot believe. So the reason why this actually is...
So when I hear something like that, then the question that arises for me is, what do you mean happening? And one of the things that I proposed was that not only did that story happen, but it's always happening. Yes. It always happened. It's happening right now, and it's always going to happen into the future. And so
Yes.
then when I look at a story like Cain and Abel, I think, well, the question, did that happen, begs the question, what do you mean by happen? You have to understand that the reality of the concepts of your question are just as questionable as what you're questioning. People say to me, do you believe in God? And I think, okay, there's a couple of mysteries in that question. What do you mean do? What do you mean you? What do you mean believe? And what do you mean God? And you say, well, we already know what all those things mean, except belief in God. And I think, we don't really know what any of those things mean.
Alright, so, if you know anything about Peterson's general ideology and worldview, you'll know that one group he seems to hate above all others are postmodern philosophers and theorists. So, in the simplest possible terms, Derita was a French philosopher whose ideas were hugely influential. It's about how tricky it is to pin down any solid sense of meaning in a sentence, a phrase, a question, because of all the implications, assumptions, meanings, suppositions, and so on baked into them, and into the mind of any given writer or speaker. Deconstruction, one of the foundations of postmodern philosophy, is the attempt to take apart the seldom noticed ways that our usage of pre-existing conceptual structures creates meaning. So for instance, if you asked Derrida whether the Cain and Abel story really happened, he might well begin his answer by pointing out that from a certain perspective, this question itself is a pretty loaded one, presupposing as it does a particular understanding of what happened means.
The question, did that happen, begs the question, what do you mean by happen?
You may be wondering whether I haven't slightly misrepresented things. We ought to consider the context of this moment. Who's he saying this to? Why? Well, this is from J. Pete's recent video talking to Muslims about Christ, and the guy he's having this discussion with is Muhammad Hijab. Despite Peterson's ostensibly atheist shtick, he and Hijab share plenty of viewers. Jordan Peterson's work has long been enjoyed in the Islamic world, and increasingly the psychologist has reached out directly to this subsection of his audience. Now, a cynic might say that there's actually a fair amount of ideological overlap between traditionalist Muslims, conservative Christians, and that whole nominal secular right-wing crowd enamored with, quote, Western values. The cynic might continue that Peterson has realized this, that Peterson has also realized this opens up a whole new set of eyes, ears, and wallets. The context of Peterson's positively Derridean response is that Hijab has stated Orthodox Muslims don't view the stories of the Quran as mythical. They view them literally as history. That isn't the Petersonian position. Peterson views the biblical and Abrahamic stories as true only in a symbolic or archetypal sense. Hijab knows this. He's pressing Peterson about this incompatibility. And this is a tricky moment for Geordie. How to solve this? How to get around this thorny issue without losing any similarly literalist potential fans? That's the point at which Peterson pulls out this ace in the hole, word salad. Peterson goes through this question word by word, supposing that the meaning of this question is largely determined by its linguistic construction, and that light may be shed upon this meaning by reversing this process, by deconstructing it. As you may remember, this is something Peterson claims to be violently opposed to. He hates this, apparently. He hates postmodernism, he hates Derrida, he hates deconstruction. And other people have noted this irony, even people who are broadly on board with Peterson's project.
I enormously respect his courage in standing up to the Canadian laws about free speech.
So why does he do it so much? Well, one answer suggests itself. Jordan Peterson is secretly a postmodernist.
All this, what you're doing now, sorry to say, yeah, but it depends on what you mean by this. It depends on what you mean. You become postmodern all of a sudden. It's like you become now.
Yeah, well, that's a definite.
Peterson's response is predictably a 5-minute tangent about, and I'm quoting here, the problem of perception and the multitude and multiplicity of perception.
To my eye, he's very evasive or non-committal about what he means by God. However he's using the word, he's not making a clear claim about what he believes. He'll often say, it would take me, 40 hours to answer that, or I wrote a 600-page book.
Michael Shermer told me that he tried to pin him down and said, do you actually believe that Jesus was born of a virgin? And Jordan Peterson said it would take me at least 2 days to answer that.
He will decline to answer a fairly straightforward question about what he believes about Jesus or about God.
Right. Who would dare say that? And that's an unbearable task in some sense. To be able to accept the structure of existence, the suffering that goes along with it. You can debate about whether or not he actually lived and whether there's credible objective evidence for that, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because there's still a historical story. And so what you have in the figure of Christ is an actual person who actually lived, plus a myth. And in some sense, Christ is the union of those two things. The problem is I probably believe that, but I don't know. I'm amazed at my own belief and I don't understand it. Like, because I've seen
Damn it, I'm all out of drinks already.
Sometimes the objective world and the narrative world touch.
But the truth is, you can do that with stories that you know to be bullshit. Pick the most preposterous character you want that could still conceivably be inspiring, Spider-Man, right? You could get up tomorrow and say, I'm just going to view each situation through the lens of what would Spider-Man do? How would Spider-Man act here? I feel sort of vaguely neurotic, but how would Spider-Man do this? Right? Like, protect me and guide me. Ya Allah. The truth of the matter is that changes your psychology. You can do it with total fictitious bullshit, right? It's a trick. That's the same game.
Back to my fundamental concern here in the difference, with respect to the difference with how we talk about these things. To call that thing God is fine. That's a God I have no problem with, right? But that's not how most people most of the time are using the word. And there's something misleading about that. The Bible thumpers in my country who think that Jesus is very likely coming back in their lifetime and he's going to judge the living and the dead and there will be a resurrection and hellfire and all the rest. If that's not the game you're playing at all, own it.
Why are you all applauding about that?
Well, someone once asked you whether you thought Jesus was literally resurrected, and you said it would take me 40 hours to answer that question.
It isn't obvious in the biblical account that Christ was literally resurrected.
Let's put it probabilistically. I mean, anything's possible. I'll tell you that it's possible that he was physically resurrected.
I said it would take me 40 hours to answer the question. I didn't say that he was.
Well, how's this for an answer? Almost certainly not. What's wrong with that answer?
You want it's a fine answer, and people have been giving that answer for a very long period of time, but the idea doesn't seem to go away.
Okay, but that's evidence of what exactly?
I don't know.
But Christianity is very interested in this historical figure and very interested that God really became one of us. And he's not just an archetype of the moral life. He's someone, he's a person who's invaded our world. So the facticity of Jesus and the resurrection. So like Peterson will talk about the resurrection as a myth and all that, yes. And you can find that in different cultures, etc. But Christianity,
when we're talking about who is Jesus, it's not just an archetype.
Right.
It's not just a myth. It's a historical figure and the very grounded fact that God became one of us.
Right. You know, it always strikes me, mythic expressions and the New Testament. Yeah, interesting. And that's in this culture and that culture. And it's the form of the moral life. And I understand all that. The myth of the dying and rising God and how powerful that is. And that's fascinating. That's the New Testament. Did you hear? Jesus, God raised him from the dead, and he was seen by 500, and he was seen by Peter, and then lastly, I saw him. That's how Paul talks.
Look at the details of how he came to power.
Yeah.
What are the ways he did evil onto the world? And then you can get really intense about your struggle with some of the complexities of human nature and power on institutions and all that kind of stuff. So the historical nature of the Bible.
We're an historical religion. And we've been
is important.
And the church fathers used, Greek philosophy, and Aquinas uses Aristotle, and all that's great. but we're an historical religion.
What I think's been happening in recent years when we've seen this apparent upsurge of religious fervor is more a matter of religious groups around the world confronting for the first time the democratization of information. Just the flood of information from cell phones and the internet and television, and they've never had to deal with this. They could always isolate their children from this. And so they're rather desperately trying everything in sight to see what they can do to preserve what they think they should preserve. That in itself is perfectly rational. If you love something dearly, you take whatever steps you can think of to try to protect it from something you see as a threat. And I think what we have to do is appreciate that that's what's happening, and then think, what is the gentlest, kindest, firmest, least disruptive way of easing the pain of the democratization of information across the world? Rather than thinking about, exterminating religion or anything like this, we should rather think in both evolutionary and you might say in epidemiological terms. We should encourage the evolution of avirulent forms of these religions. Now, how do you do that? You do that by gently setting up competition between facts and myths. And you do that by education. And you don't worry about the old folks. You don't want to say to them, you've wasted your life on this. That's cruel, that's hard. Let them finish out their days with their illusions as long as they're not in charge of armies or something like that. But let's just try to turn off the spigot and get their grandchildren and their children's children and their children just open their eyes to the wealth of factual information, not just about science, but about religions, including their own religion. I think that the toxic forms of religion only survive when there's enforced ignorance in the young. And if we can simply say, you have no right to keep your children ignorant of these facts. These are just facts. These are not, this isn't propaganda. These are truths. These are just as much truths as chemistry is truth and the arithmetic is truth. And they're going to find it's going to be hard for them to teach their traditional doctrines. This is an empirical claim, I might be wrong. I think any religion that can thrive under conditions of open information deserves to thrive and be just fine. And the rest should go extinct.